The first hours of June 6, 1944, are remembered for the roar of engines above the English Channel and the relentless thunder of naval artillery. But behind the noise, there was a quieter truth, one buried in intelligence files and Ranger field notes. Few realized that the opening chapter of the Normandy invasion hinged on a handful of specialized units trained not only to fight head-on, but to outthink, outmaneuver, and outclimb an enemy positioned atop nearly impregnable coastal cliffs. This is where the story of the U.S. Army Rangers begins, on the edge of a mission many believed to be impossible. The struggle facing the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions began long before their boats touched the churning waters off the French coast. Intelligence gathered by the British Admiralty and the OSS had revealed a network of German strongpoints designed to command the entire landing zone. At Point du Hoc, 6 formidable 155mm guns, French-made but deadly in German hands, were capable of firing across both Omaha and Utah beaches. If allowed to operate, these batteries could decimate the incoming Allied fleet. Yet the Rangers, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder, were tasked with something far more daunting than simply destroying these guns. They had to scale sheer cliffs under fire, cross unfamiliar terrain, and locate artillery that, according to aerial reconnaissance, the Germans might have already repositioned. The men who boarded the British landing craft that morning understood the stakes. Many carried grappling hooks, ropes, and lightweight ladders slung across their backs. Their craft were tossed violently in the rough seas, delaying their arrival and scattering several boats miles off course. One Ranger later recalled in his diary, "The ocean felt like it was fighting us the same way the Germans would. Every wave hit with a purpose." And when the craft finally neared Point du Hoc at 7:10, the Rangers faced an unbroken wall of fire. German machine gun nests, perched high above, unleashed torrents of rounds that shredded several boats before they reached shore. The reveal came seconds later. As the Rangers disembarked, they discovered that their rocket-propelled grappling hooks, meant to soar upward and embed into the cliff, were rendered partially useless by the soaking sea spray. Some ropes slipped free. Others tangled. Men began climbing anyway, using bayonets and knife points to gain purchase on the rock. The Germans tossed grenades and rolled barrels down the cliffs, hoping to ignite the fuel inside. "Keep moving," Rudder shouted from below, his voice almost lost in the chaos. By luck and sheer determination, enough Rangers reached the top to form a fighting foothold. But what they found at the summit added a new layer of mystery to the operation. The massive casemates, thought to house the 155mm guns, were nearly empty, only decoy timbers and ammunition crates remained. A Ranger after-action note describes the scene. "What should have been the most dangerous artillery site on the coast was silent. Too silent. Either we were too late, or they had moved them somewhere we hadn't yet discovered." The uncertainty created a ripple of tension. If the guns were elsewhere, they might still threaten the beaches where thousands of American soldiers were landing at that very moment. Acting on instinct, small Ranger teams fanned out inland, searching hedgerows and sunken lanes. It was one of these patrols, led by First Sergeant Leonard Lommel and Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn, that stumbled upon freshly cut tracks in an orchard nearly a kilometer from the cliff line. Hidden under camouflage nets were the missing guns, fully intact and pointed toward Utah Beach. Without hesitation, the patrol disabled each gun using thermite grenades, melting the elevation and traverse mechanisms. This strike, carried out by fewer than a dozen men, neutralized a threat capable of altering the outcome of D-Day itself. The application of this moment echoes through modern special operations training. It demonstrates how initiative and decentralized decision-making can pivot the outcome of massive military undertakings. Rangers that day didn't wait for orders relayed through crackling radios. They acted on intelligence, personal assessment, and urgency, the hallmark of elite units then and now. Yet the closing fact of Part 1 leaves a lingering question. Several German documents recovered near the orchard, field notes and brief maps, were logged but never fully released in post-war archives. Their exact contents remain partially redacted, leading some historians to speculate whether the Germans anticipated a landing at Normandy more precisely than previously believed. Why were the guns moved shortly before the invasion? And what else, beyond the camouflaged artillery, might those missing notes have revealed? These unanswered fragments form the silent backdrop for the next chapter, where the Rangers move east toward Omaha Beach, stepping into a battlefield defined by chaos, courage, and the lingering shadows of units that seem to vanish without explanation. Dawn on June 6, 1944 revealed a scene that would define the legacy of the U.S. Army Rangers. The shattered heights of Point du Hoc and a battalion scattered, wounded, but unbroken. Yet, while the destruction of the hidden 155mm guns became the headline achievement, the reality on the ground was far more complex. An operation marked by confusion, fractured communications, and an enemy whose movements have yet to be fully understood. What happened atop those cliffs in the hours after the guns were neutralized remains one of the most intriguing tactical puzzles of D-Day. The struggle began immediately. When Lieutenant Colonel James E. Rutter radioed, "We're on the point, guns destroyed," his message barely pierced the intermingled static across Ranger and naval channels. Reinforcements from the 5th Ranger Battalion never received the transmission clearly. Instead, they were diverted to Omaha Beach, where catastrophe was unfolding. This left barely 90 Rangers atop Point du Hoc, cut off, undersupplied, and facing growing German counterattacks as the morning progressed. The Rangers had taken the high ground, but they had not taken control. German forces from the 914th Grenadier Regiment, stationed inland, regrouped faster than anticipated. Small assault squads probed the Ranger perimeter, using the hedgerow terrain to close distance undetected. Rangers defending their newly established foxholes recalled hearing whispers in the grass, the muffled shuffle of boots approaching through waist-high vegetation. At times, the enemy seemed to strike from multiple directions simultaneously. Historical insight into this period comes from a hastily written entry in Corporal Charles Parker's journal. "It felt as though they were testing our lines, first 2 men, then 10. They knew the ground better than we did. We were holding a knife with both hands while they circled us with a dozen." This comment speaks to the Rangers' precarious situation. Elite assault troops isolated on enemy turf they had mapped only through aerial photographs and sandtable models during rehearsal. The reveal of the day came as Ranger patrols ventured farther inland to secure the orchard where the guns had been destroyed. They discovered several recently abandoned German observation posts, positions equipped with signal flags, radio equipment, and maps marked with firing coordinates. But notably, many of the maps were missing key sectors, as if the information had been stripped deliberately. Several items had been removed with precision, leaving faint impressions of where documents once lay. Intelligence officers later remarked that such neat excision was not typical of panicked retreats. Stranger still was the absence of German artillery crews. The guns had been prepared for operation, fully armed, sighted, and aligned, yet no bodies or equipment belonging to the crews were found in the area. The Rangers expected to encounter stiff resistance around such valuable weapons. Instead, they found silence and empty ground. "It was as if they knew exactly when to leave," wrote Staff Sergeant Kuhn in his after-action account. "Too soon to be caught, too late to stop what we were doing." This fueled speculation among Allied analysts that the Germans anticipated the raid or were executing a pre-planned withdrawal designed to save manpower. The application of these findings continues to inform modern military studies. Special operations schools still examine the Point du Hoc raid to understand the layered intelligence war, how visible battles mask invisible maneuvers. The Rangers' success in locating and destroying the relocated guns highlights the value of reconnaissance initiative, decentralized command, and mission-type tactics long before these became codified in modern doctrine. But for the men on those cliffs, the focus shifted quickly from victory to survival. Throughout June 6th and into June 7th, German counterattacks intensified. The Rangers repelled repeated assaults, often fighting with captured German weapons after exhausting their own ammunition. Naval support from the destroyers USS Satterlee and HMS Talabant became vital, firing dangerously close to friendly positions to break enemy concentrations forming near the Ranger lines. The cliffs shook with each salvo, and yet the German pressure did not fully abate. By the evening of June 7th, when reinforcements finally arrived from Omaha Beach, only 75 Rangers remained combat effective out of the original landing force. Exhausted, dehydrated, and surrounded by the bodies of friends they had held by sheer will. The close of Part 2 brings us to a lingering and still partly unsolved question. What became of the German forces who abandoned the 155mm guns? Some historians argue they repositioned to avoid naval bombardment. Others suspect a more coordinated withdrawal tied to intelligence that remains locked in Bundesarchiv and U.S. Army records. The meticulous removal of certain documents from the observation posts raises the possibility that the Germans were reacting to something deeper than battlefield chaos. Why did they leave their guns intact but disappear with their plans? And did their withdrawal connect to movements reported later along the approaches to Omaha Beach, movements that Allied patrols would soon encounter? In Part 3, we follow the Rangers who landed at Omaha and pushed toward Vierville-sur-Mer, where resistance flickered, vanished, and then reappeared in ways that continue to challenge historians today. In the chaos of the D-Day landings, few missions carried the urgency placed upon the Rangers moving toward Vierville-sur-Mer. Omaha Beach was slipping toward disaster in the early hours of June 6, 1944. The first waves of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions had been shattered against German defenses that remained almost entirely intact. Amid this spiraling crisis, one seldom highlighted fact stands out. A single phrase shouted by Brigadier General Norman Coda, "Rangers lead the way," was not a motto at the time. It was an order born of desperation. And it set into motion the next daring Ranger operation in Normandy. The struggle began as elements of the 5th Ranger Battalion and the scattered remnants of the 2nd Battalion touched down near Dog Green and Dog White sectors. German MG-42 fire cut across the beach like intersecting blades. Mortars landed with terrifying precision. Under this withering assault, it seemed impossible that any unit could maneuver, yet the Rangers did. They sprinted across open sand, using the smoke of burning landing craft as improvised cover. Lieutenant Charles Parker later recalled, "There wasn't time to think. You could only run." Every step felt like a negotiation with death. By 8 o'clock, Coda had recognized that the German strongpoints guarding the Vierville draws, particularly Widerstandsnest 68 and 70, were stalling the entire landing. He needed a force capable of breaking through. When he encountered the Rangers pinned behind a shingle bank, he pushed forward, barking, "If you're Rangers, go get him." What followed was a bold flanking movement inland, one that required the Rangers to leave the relative shelter of the seawall and climb the bluffs through narrow, exposed trails. Historical insight into this assault comes from a field note written by Captain John Wren of the 5th Rangers. "Intelligence had given us outlines but no real picture of what waited above. The hedgerows were thicker than anything we trained for. Every bend felt like the barrel of a gun pointed at our next breath." And indeed, the terrain of Normandy's bocage country became its own adversary. Dense walls of earth and vegetation created blind corners, dead ground, and natural ambush points. Yet they also offered concealment for both the Rangers and the enemy. When the Rangers crested the bluffs and pushed toward Vierville-sur-Mer, they encountered an unexpected condition, resistance that flickered in and out, almost erratic. A machine gun nest would fire furiously for minutes, then fall silent. A sniper would reveal himself with a single shot, only to disappear before the Rangers could flank him. In one instance, a mortar team shelling the beach abruptly abandoned its position mere moments before a Ranger squad arrived. The gun was still warm, the ammunition laid out in firing order, yet the crew had vanished without leaving blood trails, gear, or tracks deeper than a few yards. The reveal came when the Rangers reached the outskirts of Vierville. Intelligence teams later reviewing the area noted that several German units operating along the bluffs, believed to be elements of the 352nd Infantry Division, were not accounted for in post-battle prisoner tallies. Ranger patrols reported hearing movement in the fields but finding no bodies after firefights. A few soldiers wrote of being engaged from positions that were empty when they stormed them seconds later. These accounts were often dismissed as the fog of war, but they share a consistent pattern. Enemy squads that fought aggressively and then withdrew with unusual speed and discipline. One line in Lieutenant A.T. Queen's after-action report stands out. "The Germans here did not break, they relocated. They were fighting a delaying action, pulling us into ground they already knew better than we ever could." This assessment suggests a level of tactical coordination that went beyond spontaneous retreat. Yet the German records captured in Vierville that day include gaps, sections cut from maps, missing unit strength reports, and orders with dates but no signatures. Someone, at some point, removed information with care. The application of these findings resonates in modern military analysis. The Ranger advance toward Vierville is studied not only for its courage and improvisation but also for its intelligence implications. It reveals how battlefield victory can obscure a deeper picture, one in which units maneuver for reasons that documents never fully explain. While the Rangers forced open the Vierville draw, enabling armor and infantry to push inland, the peculiar disappearance of several German squads points to coordinated withdrawals that may have been designed to regroup deeper in the bocage. By midday, Ranger and infantry forces successfully linked up with elements pushing from other sectors of Omaha. They cleared Vierville streets, secured the vital exit routes, and finally connected the beachhead in a continuous front. Yet the emotional close of this operation was marked not by triumph, but by unease. Sergeant William Lewis summarized it bluntly: "We had taken the town. But some of the men we'd fought weren't in it. They'd slipped away like they knew another fight was coming." And indeed, another fight was coming. As the Rangers pushed inland in the days after D-Day, they entered a labyrinth of hedgerows filled with hidden command posts, couriers and intelligence fragments, some of which would vanish from Allied files soon after being logged. In Part 4, we follow the Rangers into the shadowed lanes of Normandy's interior, where nighttime patrols uncovered clues that raised even more questions about German movements behind the front. In the days immediately following D-Day, the beaches of Normandy slowly transformed from killing grounds into bustling hubs of Allied logistics. But only a few miles inland, the countryside told a very different story, one of shadows, sudden violence, and intelligence fragments scattered like breadcrumbs in the hedgerows. What few people realize today is that during June 10th to 12th, some of the most important Ranger actions did not involve dramatic cliff assaults or beach breakthroughs. Instead, they unfolded in the dim, claustrophobic lanes of Normandy's interior, where small patrols moved silently through terrain that swallowed sound and concealed danger at every turn. The struggle began as Ranger units, now reorganized after their separate landings, were tasked with reconnaissance operations to identify German command posts and disrupt communication lines. The hedgerows, tall earthen embankments crowned with dense vegetation, had the unsettling effect of compressing every engagement. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Firing positions appeared and vanished behind living walls of greenery. For the Rangers moving through them, it felt like stepping into an endless maze. Staff Sergeant Robert Black of the 5th Rangers later described the environment. Every corner was a blind turn. You didn't know if it was a cow, a German patrol, or a booby trap. The hedgerows didn't just hide the enemy, they hid the battlefield. German units, particularly elements of the 916th Grenadier Regiment and reconnaissance detachments of the 352nd Infantry Division, exploited the bocage better than any Allied force anticipated. They used cutouts in the hedges as firing loops, communication trenches that ran beneath route lines, and hidden paths that allowed them to shift positions with alarming speed. Historical insight into this period comes from a captured German field note dated June 11th, found near a smashed command dugout southeast of Krickevillenbessen. It referenced Bugung Schwarz, or Movement Black, a coded term Allied analysts struggled to decipher. The note listed times and routes where small German units were instructed to relocate under cover of darkness. But what stood out was the absence of destination markers. The orders only described departure points. To this day, no corresponding arrival points have been identified in surviving German records. The reveal deepened when Ranger patrols began encountering German couriers. These men, often young and lightly armed, carried dispatch bags containing maps, weather updates, and occasionally encrypted codes. But in at least 3 documented cases, the contents of the captured satchels would vanish from Ranger logs after being turned over to intelligence officers. Corporal Henry Vasquez of the 2nd Rangers wrote in a letter, "We handed over documents at 0900. By the time we asked about them that night, nobody seemed to know where they'd gone. Someone had signed for them. No one said who." One courier's map in particular raised eyebrows. It showed several routes marked with a symbol resembling a hollow triangle, a notation not found in standard German tactical mapping. These routes corresponded to areas where Ranger patrols had reported brief, intense skirmishes followed by complete enemy disappearance. Analysts suspected the markings indicated temporary rally points or staging zones for mobile squads, yet no such positions were ever confirmed after the war. The application of these findings has influenced decades of post-war studies on German defensive strategy in Normandy. Historians now believe that certain German units conducted controlled withdrawals, exchanging ground for time while protecting key intelligence materials. The ability of German squads to appear, attack, and vanish within minutes suggests a level of training and coordination that contradicted earlier assumptions about the disorganization of the 352nd Division. Ranger accounts from June 11th repeatedly describe enemy patrols that moved like they already knew the next fight, hinting at pre-planned fallback routes. But for the Rangers living through those days, the academic conclusions came much later. In the moment, their focus was survival. Night patrols, often consisting of 5 to 8 men, moved out under moonless skies, using compasses and memory to navigate the labyrinth. The distant thump of artillery echoed through the hedgerows like muffled thunder. Occasionally, a single German flare would streak upward, turning the fields white and blowing the Rangers' concealment. One Ranger remarked, "Every flare felt like someone else's finger on our pulse." By June 12th, several small but significant Ranger successes had begun shaping the wider Allied advance. They identified 2 hidden command posts used by German officers directing counterattacks against the 29th Infantry Division. They intercepted at least 4 couriers carrying partial intelligence packets. And they disrupted supply lines feeding the German defensive belt around Isigny-sur-Mer. Yet each success came with a puzzle: missing documents, unaccounted enemy units, abandoned positions cleared with deliberate precision. The close of Part 4 leaves us standing at the threshold of deeper mystery. What exactly were the Germans moving, guarding, or concealing during those 3 nights? Why did several patrol logs from these operations end abruptly in official reports? And how did these shadow movements influence the battles that followed? These questions would take on greater weight as the Allies shifted their focus toward Corentin, where the Rangers would once again be asked to make a daring move that helped shape the fate of the Normandy campaign. By mid-June 1944, the Allied foothold in Normandy had grown, but it was far from secure. The town of Corentin, sitting at the junction of routes connecting Utah Beach to Omaha, had become the next critical objective. Without it, the American landing zones would remain dangerously divided. What few documentaries mention, however, is the pivotal role played by the U.S. Army Rangers in the shadowed battle for the approaches to Corentin, an operation that blended reconnaissance, rapid assault, and intelligence recovery in ways that still intrigue historians. The fighting here offered not only tactical urgency but a string of details that never fully made their way into public records. The struggle began as the 101st Airborne Division, already bloodied from days of intense combat around the causeways to the north, prepared for a direct assault into Corentin itself. German elements of the Fallschirmjäger Regiment 6 had turned the town into a fortress. Every street corner was a potential kill zone, every stone wall a firing position. Meanwhile, just west of Corentin, Rangers were ordered to execute a bold flanking maneuver meant to crack German cohesion and open a route for the airborne troops. Their task: infiltrate the hedgerow country, identify weak points in the German perimeter, and launch a sudden strike that would force the defenders to divert crucial forces. Ranger elements, primarily companies from the 2nd Battalion, moved out under the cover of early morning haze on June 11th. They advanced through the same suffocating bocage terrain that had caused so much trouble days earlier, but by now they had learned its logic. Move quietly, avoid skyline exposure, and use every sunken lane like a natural trench system. Still, the Germans were equally adept. One ranger later wrote, "The hedgerows weren't terrain. They were an enemy themselves. You didn't conquer them. You survived them." Historical insight emerges from an intelligence briefing recorded on the evening of June 10th. Reports suggested that German units west of Corentin were redeploying irregularly. Some fields appeared heavily defended. Others, surprisingly, were abandoned. The pattern did not match a typical collapse or retreat. Instead, it resembled a puzzle, deliberate vacating of certain sectors while reinforcing others with unusual speed. This inconsistency formed the backdrop for the Rangers' raid. The reveal came as a patrol led by Lieutenant George Mabry identified a series of shallow trenches hidden under hedgerow roots. Inside were field telephones, range tables, and a half-burned message marked "Isle, urgent." The message referenced several fallback points identified only by numbers 12, 18, and K5. None of these corresponded to known German defensive symbols. Moreover, Mabry's men found a set of boot prints leading from the site to a narrow gully, and then disappearing completely. Not fading, not covered. Simply stopping. Soil analysis later suggested that the enemy had moved over a plank or temporary board to obscure tracks. A practice technique. When the Rangers launched their flanking raid on June 12th, it struck with devastating effect. They breached a lightly held hedgerow line southwest of Corentin and rolled up several German positions from the side. The sudden attack forced the Fallschirmjäger to divert manpower from their defense against the 101st Airborne. Ranger platoons fought from hedgerow to hedgerow, using smoke grenades and captured Panzerfausts to clear strongpoints. A dramatic moment occurred when Staff Sergeant Elmer Cruz led a charge across an open 60-yard field, an action so bold that German mortar crews hesitated, unsure whether it was a ruse. But as the Rangers advanced, they found several German positions abandoned in near-perfect order. Machine gun belts were laid out, maps were pinned beneath stones, and field rations were open, yet the soldiers themselves were missing. It looked as though they had received sudden, precise orders to relocate. One ranger noted, "It felt like we were chasing ghosts, except the ghosts shot back when they wanted to." The lack of consistent prisoner captures only deepened the mystery. Many of the German troops who fought there simply melted into Corentin or the surrounding network of hedgerows. The application of these observations would later influence Allied interpretations of German doctrine in Normandy. It became increasingly clear that elements of the German defense were executing controlled elastic movements, trading ground for time while attempting to prevent Allied units from forming solid fronts. However, the missing German field orders captured by the Rangers, logged at Battalion HQ on June 12 but later sealed, have never been fully released. Speculation suggests they may have contained details of coordinated withdrawals, fallback instructions, or reconnaissance routes designed to preserve key personnel. By the time the Rangers completed their raid, the 101st Airborne was pressing into Corentin. The Germans, shaken by the flanking blow, withdrew southward in disarray. The link between Omaha and Utah was finally secured. Yet the emotional close of this operation was not celebratory for the men who fought it. Sergeant Paul Simmons recalled, "We won the ground. But something told us the enemy hadn't really left. They'd just gone somewhere we hadn't found yet." And that somewhere leads directly into Part 6, where intelligence officers began piecing together the fragments uncovered by the Rangers, opening new questions about what the Germans were truly doing behind the lines during the Normandy campaign. As the dust settled over Normandy in late June 1944, analysts in rear-area intelligence posts began piecing together the fragments recovered by Ranger units across Pointe du Hoc, Vierville-sur-Mer, the hedgerows, and the approaches to Corentin. On maps spread across folding tables, officers traced the paths of patrols, the intercepted German messages, and the curious gaps found repeatedly in abandoned positions. What began as simple battlefield debriefs slowly took on another character, an attempt to make sense of a pattern that didn't quite match the expected disorganization of German forces after D-Day. The Rangers had fought in terrain soaked with chaos, yet their encounters revealed something that looked uncomfortably like a hidden logic behind German movements. The struggle for clarity began with the very first documents logged after the landings. Reports from Pointe du Hoc confirmed that the German artillery crews had abandoned their guns in good order only hours before the Rangers discovered them. Then came the Vierville engagements, where Ranger units repeatedly fought German squads that vanished before they could be captured or counted. The hedgerow patrols between June 10th and 12th brought forward courier notes and maps that seemed deliberately redacted. And the Corentin operation produced field orders that listed departure times but not destinations. Standing alone, these details might reflect battlefield confusion, but together they formed a sequence too consistent to ignore. Historical insight emerges from a memorandum written by Major Edwin H. Bennett, G2 officer attached to V Corps, dated June 20th. "We are observing repeated instances of German units withdrawing from positions moments before Allied contact. Their pattern suggests more than instinct or luck. It implies coordinated fallback movements." Bennett's memo never circulated beyond a limited audience, but the fact that it was written at all indicates the questions rising through the intelligence community. The Germans clearly knew the Bocage terrain better than the Allied invaders. But did they also possess intelligence that allowed them to anticipate certain attacks? The reveal came as analysts compared Ranger encounters with intercepted German radio traffic collected by HF/DF stations aboard naval escorts offshore. One partially decrypted message, dated June 8th, referenced Abschnittsverlegung, sector relocations. Another hinted at Reorganisation für flexible Verteidigung, reorganization for flexible defense. These were not the words of an army in total collapse. They suggested a doctrine of controlled elasticity, pulling back, then striking again from new angles. Ranger accounts from those days confirmed the effect. Ambushes that came and went like whispers, unseen squads that fired precisely and retreated without leaving equipment behind, and fallback trails marked only by absent footprints or improvised concealment techniques. Yet even as the pieces formed a possible explanation, another question emerged. Why were the most sensitive documents disappearing from Allied custody? Several Ranger patrols had turned over captured satchels containing maps, range tables, and coded notes. But when analysts later asked for these items, they found blank spaces in the logs. Items listed, signed for, and then marked transferred, without naming the receiving officer. A few intelligence veterans interviewed decades after the war admitted that certain captured materials were diverted to special analysis branches outside standard command channels. But what was so important about these documents that they bypassed normal procedures? The application of these decades-later reflections suggests a modern lesson. Even in a campaign as extensively studied as Normandy, the intelligence war remains partially obscured. The Rangers, focused on survival and mission success, rarely saw the broader picture. But unknowingly they had uncovered threads of the German defensive network that hinted at deeper planning, fallback positions prearranged long before the invasion, courier routes designed to function even under air superiority, and mobile squads assigned to preserve key reconnaissance and artillery personnel. Despite all this, the historical record remains incomplete. German divisional archives from the 352nd Infantry Division and Volkssturmgeregiment 6 contain gaps precisely where movements from June 10 to 12 should appear. Some pages are missing. Others are intact but curiously vague. Even captured orders stored in U.S. archives include redactions placed long after the war. This has led historians to propose several theories: that German units were attempting to protect the identities of higher-level intelligence officers, that they were preserving routes for a potential counteroffensive, or that some orders involved coordination with units stationed farther inland, information still considered sensitive in the early Cold War when many archives were consolidated or classified. The emotional close of the Normandy Ranger operations is therefore tinged with a sense of unresolved discovery. The Rangers broke defenses, seized key ground, and shaped the success of the landings. But they also illuminated gaps, movements, missing documents, and unexplained withdrawals that leave behind a lingering question. What was the German High Command truly preparing for in those early days of June? The final frame of this story rests not with speculation, but with the Rangers themselves. Their courage shattered the Atlantic Wall, opened the exits at Omaha, and helped secure the link to Utah Beach. Their patrols uncovered intelligence that still challenges historians today. And though many of the mysteries remain unsolved, one truth endures: the Rangers' daring actions altered the course of D-Day, even as the shadows around them preserved secrets that history has yet to fully decode.